Welcome to part one of this three-part series in which we're going to ask the question, is a cloud-first strategy sensible for disaster recovery? Now, there are some great backup solutions that leverage the scalability and availability of public cloud, but are they the correct solution as part of an enterprise disaster recovery solution? Let's take a look at workload considerations to help determine what works well in the cloud and what works better in a data center. Workloads ideal for public cloud tend to be more bursty in nature, which are great for an elastic compute model that can scale up as well as down, such as DevOps. Variable workloads such as seasonal retail that would need more compute to be spun up, perhaps in the lead up to Christmas, and compute-intensive workloads such as analytics or machine learning. To maintain the hardware in a data center all year round that could cope with busier, more compute-heavy times, you would have a data center full of tin or iron if you're in the US, that for most of the year might basically be going to waste, just waiting for those busier times. You still need to power it, maintain it, insure it, and so on. And that doesn't really make economic sense. But there are some workloads that often aren't suitable for public cloud. Examples could be primary backups because of restore times of large data sets over an internet connection, and possibly the cost of egress back to the data center. Also, high performance applications that constantly demand a lot of disk I/O and network throughput. Some workloads need to be kept running all the time, whilst others are more sporadic in nature. Because public cloud basically allows anyone to rent a virtual machine and associated resources by the hour, only pay for the number of hours consumed, and then shut down or even tear down the infrastructure when it's no longer needed, it's the more variable workloads that are very attractive candidates for public cloud. Whereas if you rented a VM by the hour and ran it ragged 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, there will likely come a point where it probably becomes cheaper to run that workload on your own hardware in your own data center. It's similar to the company car that I don't have. Now, let me explain. My workday often consists of sitting in front of a keyboard, mashing my palms into the keys and hoping something legible comes out as a result, much like I was doing whilst writing the script for this video. I have Teams or Zoom meetings with my colleagues, customers and technology partners, but for the most part, I don't need to travel ordinarily, except when I do. And that's when I would hire a nice car to drive to a meeting or a conference. Now, if I was on the road several times a week, then a company car would probably make economic sense. But as I'm not, it works out cheaper each year to just hire one when I need it and then give it back again. And of course, I don't need to worry about maintenance, car tax, depreciation, and so on. And it's worth keeping in mind that, like car rental companies, nobody's running a cloud business as a charity, and of course there's going to be some margin in there somewhere, but I just need to weigh up which option is more cost effective for me or my workloads. I recently watched a YouTube video on public cloud repatriation on the CTO Advisor channel, discussing this very topic and why some companies are bringing their workloads back from public cloud and back into their data centers. And I'm going to put a link to them in the description below because they're definitely worth checking out. I was very impressed by a chap called Bobby Allen, whose LinkedIn profile describes him as a cloud therapist at Google, living at the intersection of cloud computing and sustainability. Now, after wondering for a moment if he was given that title by the senior vice architect of made-up job names, I quickly realized two important things. Firstly, this man is smart. Whether you agree or disagree with his opinions, they are clearly, intelligently thought out and certainly worth listening to. Secondly, that he was asking some very pertinent questions. Let me play you a short clip.
As the expense of an application goes up, does the value of the application go up? And if you can't answer that question, here's another one to kind of pose is, should an application that does not have unlimited value be placed in a place that can have unlimited scale and spend?
Take a moment to consider that second one again. Should an application that doesn't have unlimited value be put in a place that has unlimited scale and spend? That sounds like a pretty wise question to ask when considering a workload for public cloud, if you ask me. When asked about cloud costs, Mr. Allen's comments were also interesting.
The math is challenging because typically VMware in the cloud is a big bucket of software-defined resources that I often can't break down and compare to native services. But back to the prior point, I can connect to all sorts of other things now. I can provision storage and services and software and other things. In my VMware data center on-prem, there's only so much that my cost can get to. There's a ceiling that's kind of fixed. But again, in the public cloud, I've now let my ideas and my lack of discipline run wild. And I think that's part of what scares people.
This made sense to me. When you run a virtualization solution on-prem, you have a finite set of functionality under a cost ceiling. When you move workloads to the cloud, they can use or consume so many more services, spin up and connect to so many more things, and generally have the ability to scale up quickly, and the unknown and unpredictable cost of that may make many IT directors fearful of making the switch to public cloud. They would no longer have that security blanket of a cost ceiling. Now, no one wants to suddenly be hit by an unexpected bill because they haven't accounted for something, or there's been a mission creep that turned out to be expensive when the bill comes in. It's an uncomfortable conversation for someone to have with the business stakeholders. So, given that some workload types are clearly suitable for public cloud hosting and some perhaps not so much, what about, for example, backing up to a cloud-hosted VM? Now, in my opinion, it can definitely form part of a disaster recovery solution, especially as part of a mitigation strategy for cyber attacks such as ransomware, but perhaps not as your only or primary backup. And here's a good reason why. An important factor when designing a disaster recovery strategy is the recovery time objective, or RTO. Or put another way, how long will it take following a disaster to get everything up and running as normal again? Of course, if you need to recover a single file or just a few files and folders over an internet connection, that's probably realistic and an acceptable RTO. But what if you had to restore a larger amount of data over that internet connection? What if an entire file server hosting multiple terabytes of data needed restoring, or heaven forbid, an entire data center's worth of data? The RTO would be astronomical and not at all realistic. It could take weeks or maybe even months to restore, and the organization really should see that as a business risk that rules it out. Now, there are solutions on the market that can redirect a user who's trying to access a locally corrupted or malware-infected file to the non-corrupted good version in public cloud without having to copy it back on premises. And that sounds like a pretty good solution, but the degree of vendor lock-in that you would be subjected to would put many people off. If you decided to stop using their gateway to the cloud, you wouldn't have access to your cloud-hosted files. You have business continuity, but how long is it still going to take to repair your on-site file server? In part 2, we'll take a deeper dive into what, in my opinion, constitutes a good enterprise-grade disaster recovery solution. So, see you in part 2.